Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. And we'll get started with some jury charge warm-up. Ready? However, if the employee abandons and turns away completely from the employer's business to engage in some purpose wholly his own, then he is outside the scope of his employment, and the employer is released from any liability. If the employee steps outside of his employment to do some act for himself not connected with the employer's business, there is no responsibility on the employer for such act. But if the employee is, at the time of such deviation, also serving the employer's purpose to some extent, there may be a liability on the part of the employer also. This presents a question for the jury. The burden of proof rests upon the defendant to prove by the greater weight of the evidence that the truck at the time of the accident was not being used in the business of the company. All right, now let's practice some literary material. And this article is called The Way of the Roses. Ready? As New Year's Day dawns on the West Coast, most Americans are still shaking off the previous night's champagne. But the sun rises on a distinctly different scene at the intersection of Orange Grove Boulevard and Green Street in Pasadena. Here, the morning light reveals a riot of color, a great mass of people, some dressed in white suits, some covered head to toe in a confusion of flower petals and hot glue, stretches for half a mile down Orange Grove. Dozens of horses wait on Waverly Drive, 5 blocks south of the main crush of people, a block north of the equestrian units, are the marching bands warming up their instruments with an enthusiasm generally saved for presidential inaugurations. All right, well, we'll finish this up in a bit, but you may have guessed it, this is about the Rose Parade. Let's get back to our article on finding motivation. Ready? Sometimes grit and determination are wonderful motivators, but more often than not, it takes a planned approach to accomplish what is truly important to us. It takes a plan that will help us through the rough patches when our initial motivation wanes. It is important to note here that how to be motivated requires a strong sense of purpose, knowing what excites you, and that you establish personal high standards. However, with that understanding, let's talk about that action plan. First, what is it that you really want? Do you want to grow your business, become proficient at real-time, obtain a higher certification, achieve a work-life balance, be honest with yourself, and choose something that is important to you at this time in your life? All right, this jury charge is regarding damages. Ready? Ladies and gentlemen, the court instructs the jury that just compensation must be determined upon the evidence under the instructions of the court and not upon the statements of counsel outside of the evidence, if any such statements have been made. Furthermore, you are not bound to believe anything to be a fact simply because a witness stated it to be so, provided you believe from all the evidence that such witness is mistaken or has testified falsely as to such fact. The damages, if any, to be awarded to the plaintiff are solely by way of compensation for loss suffered by the parents of the deceased. You can allow no damages for pain and suffering of the deceased, nor can you allow any damages for the grief or mental suffering of the parents caused by the death of their son. The test is, in view of all the facts shown by the evidence, what was the probable interest of the parents in the continuation of the life of the deceased. Let's see if we have any words that we may want to practice. We had compensation, just compensation, damages, continuation, all right, let's get back to our article on the Rose Parade. Ready? And then there are the floats that rise above the crowds like multicolored dinosaurs, swarming on top of and underneath these mechanical beasts are thousands of crew members making last-minute adjustments and replacing flowers that have wilted in the winter sun. In mere hours, this scene will become the West Coast's most spectacular, tradition-rich event. 40 million Americans will tune in on television, and millions more will watch internationally. It's a lot of pressure, especially for the float builders who make a living working with flora, a medium that starts to deteriorate the moment they're harvested. And yet, year after year, these professionals, plus thousands of like-minded volunteers devote a huge amount of time to the construction and decoration of these masterpieces. Such is the allure of the Rose Parade. I know there might have been a few challenging words in this little article. We had spectacular, tradition, flora, which is Flora, deteriorate, enthusiasm, distinctly, instruments, presidential inauguration, and some of those words I just gave you were from the first half of the article, which I read a little earlier. So all good vocabulary development. All right, now let's read a little from our article on finding motivation. Ready? Second, consider the obstacles that are getting in your way. Fear of new things, perfectionism, lack of resources, not knowing how to get started, wasting time. Do any of these sound familiar? Take heart that your plan is going to address those obstacles. Third, take one of your priorities and identify specific obstacles. Chances are it is the bad habits you've been engaging in that have left you in a rut. I don't write clean enough to provide real time. I really don't need another certification. I don't have the financial resources to market my business. Next, change that habit. A habit has 3 elements: a trigger, a daily routine, and a reward. If you've wanted to write real time, but your daily routine is to complain about your skill level, or that there's no demand in your area, or you don't have time to practice, or you don't know how your CAT software can help, can you guess what your reward will be? All right, that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.